This is one comment from a series of many on my doublethink video. I'm going to try to hit all of the points. I just grabbed one comment. Quick reminder, I'm not a therapist or any other mental health professional. I'm just a person who's reading a book, and so this is just my understanding. The first question was, how is doublethink maladaptive? And from the last few years of being in therapy and reading different trauma books and stuff, I've kind of come around to thinking that maladaptive is kind of a misused term in general, that what maladaptive actually is when we have a coping method that was adaptive at one point in our lives and then we continue using it after we no longer need it. It's not that we just randomly do things that don't make sense or that aren't helpful. It's that we kind of get stuck in coping patterns that we no longer need. And so I wouldn't say that doublethink is maladaptive. I think it's adaptive when somebody is in captivity, and that doesn't have to mean prisoner of war or kidnapping type situations. It can mean domestic abuse dynamics or childhood abuse dynamics, any traumatic home or situation where the person is stuck. And while somebody is stuck, it makes sense to use doublethink because it helps you to navigate the abuse. When you asked why, or for healthy and unhealthy examples, my understanding would be that doublethink, while it can be adaptive, probably isn't ever what I would call healthy. I'm wondering if maybe where you're confusing it would be with being able to see nuance, or perhaps with cognitive dissonance. Because there are lots of different situations where somebody can kind of be of two minds about something. With cognitive dissonance, we are faced with something that doesn't fit with our current belief structure, and then we have to find some way to adapt that because it's this new information I'm getting doesn't make sense based on my current beliefs. So then we have to either use that discomfort to realize that I've been operating from a false premise and I was wrong and I need to change my beliefs or understanding now. Or other times people will, my cat's tail, other times people will be unwilling to adapt their beliefs and then will instead twist something about that information that they received so that they can keep believing their old belief instead. And I'm just kind of making this up, but other times when you are kind of two minds about things, it can just be a sign that you don't fully understand something. I kind of think this, but I kind of think this, and I'm not sure yet. That's just kind of a state of confusion or of uncertainty. Or other times there's just nuance. It's I believe this in this case and that in that case, and it varies. I think where doublethink is different is that doublethink is about actively believing two things that contradict each other. So they can't both be true. And it's not like cognitive dissonance where you alter one in order to keep believing the other. It's that you accept both at the same time, even though that logically you can't. And the reason that doublethink occurs in situations of captivity trauma is because one of those sets of beliefs is yours. It's your reality and what you actually believe and know. And the other is the perpetrator's. And so you kind of convince yourself to some degree that their reality is correct. So just a quick example would be, I know my belief is that no human deserves to be beaten. But then if you're in captivity with somebody who beats you and they tell you that that's your fault and that you deserve that, you can also come to believe that you do deserve to be beaten, even though your actual value is that nobody deserves to be beaten. And those contradict each other. You can't believe both at once, but you might if you're experiencing doublethink in a captivity situation. And so, because doublethink is taking on a perpetrator's reality or a perpetrator's belief system that contradicts your own, I would argue that it's never healthy. But it might be necessary and it might be very helpful to cope with captivity. So I'm not saying it's bad, but I don't think it's ever healthy either, if that makes sense. And then I think the real long-term problem with that is that once you become free, so if a battered woman leaves the abusive man, or if an abused child grows up and gets their own apartment and creates their own life, they might still struggle with that double think of, I'll just use the same example again, of I still believe now that that I sometimes deserve to be beaten. And so if you leave your original captivity situation, but you still have that part of the perpetrator's belief system ingrained in you, even though it's not really yours, that could theoretically get you into further harmful situations in the future, because you might find yourself in a situation where you're not captive, where you are free and you could leave, but because part of you believes that you do deserve to be beaten, if somebody, I don't know, walks up to you at the store and hits you, you might not run away. One of your additional comments said, are we talking about learned helplessness? And I have another TikTok a few videos back that actually referenced learned helplessness. I really, really hate that term. But also I think it's a confusing term because it means different things to different people. But kind of the idea that once somebody is traumatized in a situation where they are helpless, then they don't inherently realize their power once they are no longer in that helpless situation. By that definition of learned helplessness, yeah, I would think that that does overlap a fair amount with doublethink. However, as my other video that talked about learned helplessness from this book referenced, the idea of learned helplessness is often characterized as like just being totally passive and not caring, and that's really inaccurate. Because a lot of times the person who from the outside looks like they just have learned helplessness and they just don't care and aren't trying, isn't true. They're actually having a lot of like thoughts and internal attempts at making plans to do something or make things better. They're not actually accepting things as they are. It's that their understanding of how much power they have or how much initiative they can safely take has been really, really diminished. Your last question said if it's kind of about a focus on survival and about being in isolation, how would this vary from like being a monk? And I know almost nothing about monks, so really, really take this with a grain of salt. But my understanding is that people who have experienced a captivity trauma, coercive control trauma, are not choosing necessarily to focus on survival and to be in isolation. It is forced on them, whether in a very literal sense of not being able to escape, or they have really been coerced into it through a combination of force and fear and psychological trauma, to where they don't want to live this way. It's something they've either been literally forced into or manipulated into. And then also I think that video talked a little bit about how this can persist in isolation even once somebody is free. They can find themselves isolating for various reasons. And I think what's tricky about that is trauma survivors often think that they are just choosing isolation, that they don't want this rich social life and that they just feel more comfortable at home and they're just an introvert and things like that. But I think what this book is partially arguing is that when you have certain types of trauma, it can lead you to just not see the possibilities for your life, or to feel unworthy, or other things that cause you to really like narrow your focus or narrow your options in life without really realizing you're doing that. And I don't think monks would experience that.